Hey everyone, VC, people just strolling through YouTube land. Thanks for stopping by my channel. Tony's LPs are us. We're here in Studio B where we actually keep a lot of Beatles, a lot of Bond stuff, which is apropos for this little segment because I'm going to be reviewing this baby, the Beatles box set, US Mono. It's called US 1964 Albums in Mono. So we're going to talk about this. I did an unboxing the other day, which I hope you got to see. So I'm going to do a kind of an unboxing again, but rather quickly. I'm going to talk about the pressings, but basically I'm going to talk about the sound. I listened to each record. I also compared a few of them with the original monos that I have in my collection, and my original monos were surprisingly well kept. I haven't listened to them in a while, but they're excellent to I would say near mint. There's no pops, there's no scratches, there's no hiss. And the ones I played, I do have those in the collection that have that hiss from overwear. But the ones I compared them to were just top, and just like this box is. Here's the actual. You can see the in appearance as they were given to us as gifts from the gods by Capitol Records. We all know what Capitol Records did. They actually got the tapes from London, from EMI, from George Martin, would send tapes back and forth, and they would compile records or albums based on what they thought the American public wanted. You got to remember that the Beatles were basically unknown. There's so much written about the Beatles that half of the stuff I knew I've forgotten. As far as these go, each record comes with a beautiful gatefold type of inner insert, and the notes are all from Bruce Spicer, who's a Beatle aficionado, did numerous books on the Beatles. And I don't know if these are excerpts from his books, but they're phenomenal. They really give you a really good insight. Now, Dave Dexter from Capitol Records was in charge of the kind of foreign things that came from outside the States, and he actually was the one who sequenced these records and picked out what he wanted for these records. And if you go into the liner notes, some of them specifically say what records the records that came from in Europe, the Beatles records that originated in Europe, and what we have here. So there's a difference up until Sgt. Pepper, obviously. But we also had, instead of like 14 tracks, we had 11 and 12 tracks. Capitol did that to save money on royalties. The royalty payments were set up differently in America versus the UK, where the UK, I believe, it was a blanket royalty charge based on the entire side. Here, it was based on each record, each track. So Capitol would save about 2 cents a track if they reduced the tracks from 14 to 12. Some of the tracks are also 11. And of course, these records were super quick. I got to listen to almost the whole, virtually the whole package last night, except for the Beatles story, which I just played a little clips of just to hear it. But the records are basically 13 to 15 minutes aside, if that. I think one even tracks in at 11. I'll look at the notes. But and also 90% of the records sold in America back in the day when these records were debuted were mono sold. Mono records were about $1 cheaper than the stereo counterpart. Most people didn't have stereos anyway, and to save $1 when you're a teenager and a Beatle record came out every few months, that was the way to go. What I find that interesting is Beatle records in mono today are more sought after and harder to find in good condition than the stereo counterparts, even though the majority that were sold were the original Rainbow Capitals were mono. Just a great cut from digital, probably from a digital file, but analog masters were used. Probably the same equipment, I believe, that was used at Capitol. I believe it's an all analog chain, but Mr. Reeves cut these to lacquer, and I think he did a great job. These aren't audiophile records by any stretch of the imagination. When you hear them, you're not going to pick up those little nuances that you hear in say a modern record, or the ones that John Martin redid a few years back. You're not going to hear that type of fidelity, sonics. These are mono. These are the way we heard them back in the day. And I know these are the way we heard them back in the day because I compared, and they're very, very close. I give these a slight edge to the new ones as far as punch and just articulation on these records. Here's the first one. Beautiful jacket, like I talked about. The blue tint. Here's an original mono. That's excellent to VG plus to excellent. You could see the blue tint. I wasn't even aware. I don't know what I was thinking, but I always, maybe I've seen different versions of this, but I've always thought that the tint was more black and white than blue. But you can see here that this is a blue tint, so they copied that. I love the back with their little uniforms on, the Beatle boots, the little intro. You've read about them in Time, Newsweek, the New York Times. Here's the big beat sound of that fantastic, phenomenal foursome, Meet the Beatles. Now, this wasn't the first Beatle record in the States. As you know, we have Introducing the Beatles, which I'll talk about later. That was on the VJ company when Capitol kind of passed it up initially, passed up distributing the Beatles. This comes with an original inner that advertises records that were being released from Capitol at the time. Here's the rainbow Capitol. Now, these pressings are flawless. I'll pull this one out to show you. And I cleaned them. I cleaned most of them on my VPI vacuum cleaner. I always clean new records, but a few I didn't clean. I got lazy, and let me tell you, the ones I didn't clean were dead quiet. Not one pop, not one blemish. These records are flawless. They're flat. They're heavy 180. Here you have the great notes by Spicer, probably from one of his books. And here you have one of the tapes, the tape box, side 1 and side 2. 13 minutes aside for this actual LP. And there's a promotional poster. The Beatles are coming. Meet the Beatles. What's cool about this, it gives you the dates that they were released. January 20th, 1964. This is the mono. They knock it out of the park. Starts off with I Want to Hold Your Hand. The sequencing by Dave Dexter is just superb. You know, we all talk about how America butchered these Beatle records, but you know, we didn't know what was over there, and I had no idea that there were actually the Beatle records in Europe were different from the Beatle records that I grew up with. So I Want to Hold Your Hand. I saw her standing there. Don't Bother Me, Little Child. I Want to Be Your Man. A great Ringo track. He really kicks ass on that. You can hear him flying all over the place. So what's really impressive on these are it's George's rhythm, John's rhythm guitar, his Rickenbacker rhythm guitar with the 3 pickups. Which I think he bought for about 200 pounds back in the day, maybe more, maybe, I don't know, 150 pounds back in the day that he picked up in Germany. But just a great recording all the way around, very close to the original. I give it a little bit of an edge. Now here we have the Beatles' second album. Now the Beatles' second album came on the heels of the Beatles' Meet the Beatles. This was released April 10th, 1964 on Capitol T2080 mono. There's the tape box. Clocks in at 11 minutes and 24 seconds, and side 1 is 15:46. So I believe there's 11 tracks on this. They actually thought that the Beatles are going to sell either way. People aren't going to complain about one less track. It was more of a saving money on Capitol Records. Like I said, they save 2 cents a track as far as publishing. When you sell 3 or 4 million copies, I guess that adds up. And you can see here that that this tape has been marked with a sticky, which they didn't have back in the day. It says acetate do not bake, digitally archived by Capitol Records. So this is great, great reading. You really pick up a lot of insight onto this. Now, what's interesting about this record is the Beatles' second record. I didn't go over my original with this, but this sounds great. This has the original inner as well. You can see the same as the first inner that we showed on Meet the Beatles. But this is a Beatle record that is probably half Lennon and McCartney, half covers. You have Roll Over Beethoven, You Really Got a Hold on Me, Devil in Your Heart, and Money, Long Tall Sally. So, and Please Mr. Postman. So most of these are covers. It introduced us to a lot of the Motown stuff, if you weren't into that. And it also introduced the world, North America, and wherever these records ended up, to a lot of these Motown covers and rockers like Long Tall Sally, which Paul is doing his darnest to try to kick this out. They were such good rock and roll singers. What really strikes me on this is the majority of these records, well, almost the majority, but they have John Lennon lead vocals, and John Lennon was such a great rock and roll singer, and especially accompanied by his Rickenbacker rhythm guitar that you could hear it on this record. George's performances were always stellar. Of course, you could hear the bass pop through here, Paul's bass on his Rickenbacker, or Hofner bass on his Hofner bass. But She Loves You, Roll Over Beethoven is highlighted here, just like the original. But this sounds really good. And as far as You Really Got a Hold on Me, they knock it out of the park. And Smokey Robinson, who wrote that for the Miracles, Smokey Robinson, the Miracles, acknowledged that in print and on interviews I've seen, where he thanked the Beatles for putting his record on their album, the Beatles' second album on Capitol. He was like overwhelmed that they would do that. He said he was honored, because he was also honored, but he also knew that this was going to take him to a different level. And if you listen to that, it's such a great song. The Beatles could have written that song. Here we come up with the Beatles movie, the first movie, directed by Richard Lester. The great Hard Day's Night compared to Marx Brothers. It was a huge success. The Beatles waited for a vehicle that would propel them and not hurt them. They were given a lot of other movie scripts, but they were more like, I guess, movies with other artists where they would play a tune and then would go to their beach blanket bingo type of thing, or concert type of deal. But the Beatles waited. They got the movie that propelled them. This is still a classic black and white movie. This is on UA because UA financed it. The deal was with EMI and Capitol that they would finance it, but they also got to put out the soundtrack. And now we have a soundtrack on UA. And this soundtrack sounds great. It's just a real rocker. Starts off with A Hard Day's Night, which I believe the Beatles wrote, if legend is correct. They said, we need a title track, and the Beatles, or John and Paul, basically wrote it within hours, using whatever material they had at the time, maybe a matchbook cover. But A Hard Day's Night, Tell Me Why, I'll Cry Instead. Now, I'll Cry Instead on the original, which I'm going to show here. And I compared these to this one. I compared this to the new one. And this sounds great. I think Hard Day's Night is a really good sounding record in this collection. But it compares very closely to the original. And the original, if you know, there's a misprint. instead of I'll cry instead is I cry instead. And that's on this. And it's also on the actual record label. So instead of I'll cry instead, it's I cry instead. And I was hoping that since that was the original release in America, I was hoping that they would do that on this, but they didn't. They corrected it. I'll cry instead is on here. But this sounds great. It's just unbelievable. Can't Buy Me Love, A Hard Day's Night instrumental. Now, the instrumental tracks were from the movie, and it's half and half, and it's divided, different from the UK, obviously, but you get that swinging 60s instrumental music of Beatles songs, and it's almost funny because the Beatles changed that whole, generic rock swinging music. It's more like a John Barry 7 when he was doing, before he did the Bond soundtracks, he had a little group that he would actually play that type of music in clubs and record that type of music. And if you think about it, if you watch early American TV shows, like say the Beverly Hillbillies or early Batman, and whenever there was a rock group featured in that little episode, they always did this swinging beatnik type of rock music, and that's what's on here. The great instrumentals though. But I want to point out that Ringo's theme, This Boy, which is the fourth track on side 2, where in the movie Ringo is contemplating whatever. The guitar on that is Vic Flick, the one who did the James Bond theme. Mr. Flick just passed away a few days ago at age 87, and he talks about performing on this record where George Martin called him in to actually specifically play that. And if you listen to the guitar solo in the beginning, you could almost hear the same tone as the Bond theme. I believe he used a 61 white Stratocaster guitar, and that's my little tidbit about this. But just great sonics, great boom. And I don't know if I mentioned this because I was thinking about it, but on my audio research amplifier, I have a button to do a knob that does mono. So I listen to these in pretty true mono. I don't have a mono cartridge. I don't change my cartridges. I have a Project Dyna and a Dynavector cartridge, but I have the little switch on my main tube amp, and that locks it in. So most of you out there are probably not going to hear these in true stereo. Your stereo cartridge will synthesize it back to the one channel mono, but I was able to get a good mono read, and I could hear it lock in when you switch from the stereo component to the mono. So I did do that, and like I said, I cleaned these. Most of these, the ones I didn't clean, sounded just as good as the ones I did clean. Next up in this box set is the Beatles story. This is a documentary disc, they call it. It's a 2-record set. This is only available if you bought the box set. This has great liner notes about this from Spicer. Comes with an original inner sleeve as well. Inner sleeve same as the other ones, and later on you'll see that the inner sleeves change. Here's the tape box, and this record clocks in fast too, maybe 13 minutes, 12 minutes aside. This is 12:53 and 13:07 for the one tape box. This came out in November 22nd, 1964, and I really just played bits and pieces of this. I have an original, which I talked about. But if you're a completist, you need the box set. The box set is really nice. It's a little bit more money, or a lot more money, about 130 plus. So you're getting the Beatles story. You're getting the box with the slipcase. Right now, the Beatles story is not available separately, but I kind of think in the future it will be available. Okay, next up we have something new. Things we said today, anytime at all. When I get home, I'll cry instead. And here we get I'll Cry Instead again. And here we have I Cry Instead. So they actually repeated this record from the UA soundtrack on this record. And like I said, I can't go over all the nuances of what's in these liner notes because Bruce Spicer knocks it out of the park. Just a great writer and Beatle expert. Now this side 2 on this clocks in at 11 minutes and 28 seconds. So like I said, these are quick. It's like put on an EP basically. I'll Cry Instead, Things We Said Today. This to me, Things We Said Today was almost like a Yardbirds type of song. It was a little bit more modern. You could see how they started to evolve. This also has I Want to Hold Your Hand sung in German, which was the first time we heard here in German. A lot of these records, a lot of these tunes, the boys did in their Cavern Club years and their touring years in Germany and Liverpool. But If I Fell, I'm happy just to dance with you, and I Love Her. Slow Down, Matchbox, just tremendous. That's from the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. That's the first time we saw this in color. There you could see John's guitar, and I believe George had a Gibson J160E and the Hofner, and Ringo's set of drums. Very simple kit, but he kicked ass. Just did a great. Ringo cannot be diminished. I will not diminish Ringo. I stick up for Ringo. When I talked to Giles Martin about Ringo, and I said, wow, I went to a listening party at the power station in New York. I forget what it was called when we went. But my friend Lee took me. He had he publishes Cinema Retro magazine, and he was invited, and he took me along, which was a thrill of my lifetime. So I got to meet Giles, and I said, Ringo sounds really good. He kind of like jumped at me, kind of got upset. Like, why would you even insinuate that Ringo didn't sound good? But when they redid the White Album and the subsequent Giles Martin reissues, they did emphasize more drums and bass. And I know it just put him out there, but I never would ever insult the great Ringo. Here we have Beatles 65, which is one of my favorites. And here you have the Four Seasons jacket, which I always thought was kind of silly. And this is supposed to be winter, but they're holding up umbrellas. Now, maybe that's what happens in London, but you could see the squares here, different seasons. And on the back, you have a complete replica of the original with ads. This has the great liner notes again, and it has an inner that is the original inner. This actually advertises Beatle records now, because this Beatle record was released in December 15th, 64, so towards the end of 64. No Reply, I'm a Loser, Babies in Black, Honey Don't, which is Ringo's vocal, and he yells out, rock on, George. And George does an unbelievable solo of Honey Don't. Mr. Moonlight with the great organ, Babies in Black, Rock and Roll Music, which they did, I believe, live on the BBC. A lot of these are done on the BBC records. Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, which is George doing Carl Perkins. Great solos on that record. No Reply. She's a Woman, which just sounds so modern to me. And the guitar on this, on George's lead guitar on this, it sounds super. Now, like I said, these aren't audiophile records. They're not that type of record. These are true replicas, sound-wise and packaging-wise, that we got back in 64 and 65. And here you have some promotional photo. And the liner notes all thank George Martin, all thank Kevin Reeves, who did the lacquers, did the audio lacquers, and they thank Yoko Ono Lennon, and Olivia Harrison for their input on this. And it actually goes into how these were mastered from the original master tapes using a completely analog signal path, and I believe they used the same type of equipment that was used originally, or whatever best that they could. So Beatles 65, really good stuff, really good stuff. Now here we have the one that I think I went back and compared this to the Introducing the Beatles from VJ. Now this is the Beatles early, and what they've done was they used a photo that wasn't an early photo. I believe this was a photo that was the back of Beatles for Sale, maybe in England. Here you have a back cover, but you can see the packaging is superb. They really did a nice job. Sound-wise, quiet pressings, clarity. What really these records really bring to light the Beatles' great vocals, their great harmonies, their great intuitive tuning and chemistry that they had. There's books on the sessions. You could go back and look at all these sessions. These were tapes sent by George Martin to Capitol in the U.S., and I believe some of them were stereo. They folded them down to be used as mono. Don't know which ones. You could go through these notes, and that will tell you exactly which ones were originally stereo, and which ones were mono, and which ones were stereo folded down to mono. This record, early Beatles, it's one side is 10 minutes and 52 seconds, and one side is 15 minutes, 15 seconds. And I compare these tracks to the Introducing the Beatles tracks, and they are super close. I give this a little bit of an edge. Some of the Beatles tracks on Introducing the Beatles, I give a little bit of an edge. Hard to do. I actually have mono Introducing the Beatles, which I'm going to show. But here you have some more ad stuff. The deal was that Capitol had to spend at least $40,000 to promote the Beatles. I guess the first year that they were given the rights, and they probably did more than that because the money that was coming in was just phenomenal. They were selling millions and millions of records. I think Help, or Hard Day's Night rather, was the biggest selling soundtrack record at that time. Here is the Introducing the Beatles that I listened to. That's a mono counterfeit cover. And here's this one. That's a stereo, but it plays mono. And there's the actual label. So these were really close. Back and forth I went on these because I wanted to see if the early fresh VJ tapes sounded different, VJ cuts. And believe me, if you think about it, VJ did a great job on these. To have a small company put these out, that sounded so good. Now here, I'm going to show you something on this, if I can find it. Where is it? Hold one second. Okay. Now, I was going through most of these inner inserts, the information that each album comes with, right? And I noticed that they repeat two paragraphs. On one side here, it's the third paragraph. By this time, Capitol's Dave Dexter had refined his formula for programming Beatle albums. Here again, we see that same paragraph on the second page. By this time, Capitol's Dave Dexter has refined it, and it goes to the second paragraph. So they repeat themselves on page 1 and page 2, and I don't know how that got through the publishing readers, these proofreaders, but it did. So that's just my little find, right? I found that my comprehension isn't bad. So overall, sound is different from the UK, not audiophile, but we don't want audiophile. We want it a replication or a reenactment, if I may, of what we heard when we got these records as Christmas presents, or when we got our aid homework and our parents bought us these records, or however you got them, spent your own money from cutting lawn or newspapers. But these are exactly the same. They're a little bit more dynamic. They have a little bit of a more oomph to them. You could hear, Ringo is really knocking it. Paul is kicking it out of the park. Like I said again, John's vocals just is what I focused on these times, and even George's vocals, that nasally George vocal where he got his one or two vocals, and then the harmonies and the rhythm of John and the drums, just great. I highly recommend this set. I don't really think it has any downside to it. So hope you like this review. Hope you got some insight into what you're going to hear. It's just going back to 64, going back to 65. We have better equipment now, but those records always sounded good back in the day. So thanks a lot. Let me know what you think, and appreciate all the subs. If you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. Talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.